The entire table fell silent the moment I walked into the private dining room. My ex-wife, Sarah, looked up from the diamond ring my brother had just placed on her finger, her face a mask of shock and fear. My mother's smile froze, her glass of champagne hovering halfway to her lips. My father's jaw tightened, his usual air of dismissive superiority faltering for the first time in years. And my brother Mark, the golden child, the center of their universe, simply stared, his expression a cocktail of confusion and rage. They were celebrating their engagement, a union built on the ashes of my former life. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted duck, but all I could smell was betrayal. They all believed her tearful, "I miss you" text from last week was a genuine regret. They couldn't possibly know it was the legally binding confession I needed to burn their entire world to the ground. For weeks, she had been sending me messages filled with fabricated remorse, telling me she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, that she still loved me. My family saw these texts, which I had deliberately let them discover, as proof of my lingering hold on her, a sign that even after everything, I was still the loser, pining for a woman who had moved on to bigger and better things, namely, my brother. They thought I was here tonight to make a pathetic scene, to beg for her back. They couldn't have been more wrong. I gave them a slow, deliberate smile, enjoying the panic that was beginning to dawn in their eyes. They saw my cheap suit from 5 years ago replaced by a custom-tailored Tom Ford. They saw the beaten-down despair in my eyes replaced by a cold, unwavering calm. They saw a ghost they thought they had buried long ago, now resurrected and standing before them, not as a beggar, but as a king holding the deed to their ruin. I wasn't here to plead. I was here to collect a debt. My revenge wouldn't be loud or emotional. It would be quiet, corporate, and absolute. How could one simple text message be so powerful? To understand its true meaning, we have to go back 5 years, to the day my life ended and this story truly began. 5 years ago, I wasn't standing in a Michelin-star restaurant. I was kneeling on the stained carpet of our tiny one-bedroom apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes. They weren't my boxes. They were Sarah's. She was leaving, and she was taking everything that wasn't nailed down. The air wasn't filled with the scent of roasted duck. It was stale with the smell of instant noodles and defeat. I was working on my startup, a predictive analytics platform I called Nexus. I poured every dime we had into it. Our savings, a second mortgage on our small condo that my parents had condescendingly co-signed, and a series of high-interest loans. I truly believed Nexus could change the world of logistics and supply chain management. Sarah had called it my obsession. Now, she called it my failure. "I can't do this anymore, Alex," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. She stood by the door, holding her purse like a shield. "I'm 28 years old. My friends are having babies, buying houses. Their husbands have real jobs. What do I have? A mountain of debt and a husband who thinks he's the next Steve Jobs, but can't even afford to take me to the movies." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. I tried to explain that we were on the verge of a breakthrough, that the algorithm was finally showing promise. I pleaded with her for just 6 more months. She just laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound that echoed in the half-empty room. 6 more months of what? Eating canned soup and dodging calls from collection agencies? Look at yourself, Alex. You haven't slept in weeks. You're pale, you've lost weight, and you walk around like a zombie, muttering about data models. It's pathetic. She slid her wedding ring off her finger and placed it on the kitchen counter next to a stack of unpaid bills. I gave you the best years of my life. I'm not giving you the rest of them." And with that, she walked out the door. She didn't look back. I just sat there, listening to her footsteps fade down the hallway, until the only sound left was the hum of the old refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own broken heart. The silence was crushing. I wasn't just broke, I was fundamentally broken. In the depths of that despair, I did the one thing I thought I could still do. I called my parents. I expected a lecture, maybe some "I told you so's," but I fundamentally believed they would help me. I was their son, after all. How wrong I was. The phone call was a chilling premonition of what was to come. Sarah called us heartbroken. My mother's voice was sharp, accusatory. She told us everything. How you gambled away all your money on that computer nonsense. How you ignored her. We warned you, Alex. We always said you had your head in the clouds. It didn't matter that Sarah had been enthusiastic at first, or that the money was a joint investment in our future. The narrative was already set. I was the villain, the failure. My father was even worse. He was a man who measured worth in dollars and cents, and by his metric, I was worth less than zero. Your brother Mark has a great job, a company car, a clear path to management. He's sensible. He makes us proud. Why couldn't you just be more like him? He demanded. We co-signed on that condo to help you be stable, not to fund some pipe dream. We're selling it. We have to cut our losses before you drag us down any further. I begged them, explaining that selling then would wipe me out completely, leave me with nothing but debt. His response was ice cold. That's your problem, not ours. You made your bed. The final twisting knife came from Mark himself. He called me a few days later, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Hey, bro, just heard what happened. Tough break. Don't worry, I'm taking Sarah out to dinner tonight just to make sure she's holding up okay. She needs a shoulder to cry on." He wasn't comforting her. He was circling like a vulture. He saw my collapse as his opportunity. Within weeks, they were an item. My family wasn't just neutral, they were actively on the other side. They threw a dinner party to welcome Sarah, the daughter they never had, into the family while I was packing my few remaining clothes into a duffel bag, officially homeless. They didn't just abandon me in the fire, they poured gasoline on it. And in that moment, I understood. I wasn't a son or a brother to them. I was a scapegoat. For the next 2 months, my world shrank to the size of my 10-year-old Honda Civic. That car was my bedroom, my office, and my dining room. I'd park in the far corners of 24-hour supermarket lots, pulling a sunshade over the windshield for a sliver of privacy. I showered at a cheap gym I could barely afford, lived off the dollar menu, and used the free Wi-Fi at coffee shops to frantically apply for any tech job that would have me. But my confidence was shot. The shame was a physical weight. Every time I saw a happy couple walk by, I felt a pang of Sarah. Every time I saw a family, I felt the sting of my parents' rejection. I was drowning in their judgment, their voices a constant looping chorus in my head, telling me I was worthless. The turning point didn't come with a flash of lightning or a lucky break. It came quietly on a Tuesday night in the back of that cold car. I was staring at my cracked phone screen, scrolling through my brother's social media. He had just posted a photo of himself with Sarah, my parents beaming on either side of them. The caption read, "So happy to have my family's full support in all my endeavors. Couldn't do it without them." And something inside me just snapped. Not with anger, but with clarity. Their support wasn't something I had lost. It was something I had never, ever had. Their love was conditional. Their approval was a prize for conformity. It was all a transaction, and I had simply failed to pay their price. In that moment, I was free. Their opinions no longer had any power over me. I wasn't trying to win back their love anymore. I wasn't trying to prove them wrong. I just wanted to prove myself right. I pulled out my old laptop, the one Sarah had called a worthless toy. I plugged it into a cheap power inverter and pulled up the code for Nexus. Without the desperation, without the need for their validation, I saw it clearly. The entire architecture was sound, but one core assumption in the predictive model was flawed. It was an elegant, simple mistake. My hands started flying across the keyboard, not with frantic hope, but with cold, calm purpose. For 3 days, I barely moved, fueled by cheap coffee and a singular focus. In the dim glow of that laptop screen, in the backseat of a beat-up car, Nexus was reborn. The next 3 years were a blur of caffeine, code, and sheer force of will. I got a low-level IT job to stop the financial bleeding and rented a windowless room in a shared basement. My life became a simple, brutal routine. From 9 to 5, I worked my day job. From 6 p.m. until 3 a.m., I worked on Nexus. Sleep was a luxury I scheduled in 3-hour increments. My diet consisted of coffee, cheap energy bars, and the occasional celebratory pizza when I solved a particularly nasty bug. I was a ghost, a machine made of code and ambition. I didn't date. I didn't see friends. My entire existence was dedicated to building my company from the ground up, one line of code at a time. While I was grinding away in my subterranean hole, my family was living a life of leisure, which they proudly documented online. I'd see photos of Mark and Sarah on ski trips in Aspen, on beaches in the Caribbean. My mother would post about my brother's latest promotion, his new luxury car, the fancy galas they attended. Every post was a carefully curated performance of success, and every like they got felt like another stone being thrown at me. They never once tried to contact me. To them, I had simply ceased to exist, an embarrassing chapter they had successfully erased from the family history. It didn't hurt anymore. That cold clarity I'd found in my car had hardened into a diamond-sharp resolve. Their world, with its promotions and parties, seemed flimsy and fake compared to what I was building. I was creating something real, something with tangible value. I landed my first client, a small local shipping company, by offering my service for free for 3 months just to prove it worked. They were so impressed that they signed a 2-year contract. That first check wasn't for much, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was proof. I used that money to hire my first employee, another hungry young programmer I found at a local hackathon. We worked side by side in my tiny room, our screens illuminating the darkness. The company was no longer just me. It was becoming a real entity. The ghost was starting to build a body. The leap from a 2-man operation in a basement to a legitimate tech firm happened faster than I could have imagined. That first small contract gave us a case study, concrete data that proved Nexus wasn't just theoretical. It delivered staggering results. We used it to get a meeting with a mid-sized regional logistics company, a deal that felt impossibly out of our league. I spent a month preparing for that pitch, refining every slide, anticipating every question. I walked into their boardroom, not as a desperate man from a basement, but as the confident founder of a revolutionary technology. They signed an exclusive 3-year contract worth $1.5 million. I remember seeing the wire transfer hit the company bank account. I didn't shout or celebrate. I just stared at the number, at all those zeros that followed the one. It wasn't just money. It was security. It was power. It was the foundation of the fortress I was building around myself. With that capital, Nexus exploded. I hired a proper team: engineers, salespeople, account managers. We moved out of the basement and into a sleek, open plan office downtown. I finally traded my beat up Honda for a respectable car and moved into a minimalist condo with a floor to ceiling view of the city. I started eating at restaurants where the menus didn't have pictures of the food, but I kept my success quiet. I had no social media presence. My name wasn't on the company website as CEO. I used a managing director as the public face of the company. My family, engrossed in their own bubble of petty social climbing, had no idea. They still pictured me as the pathetic failure, probably flipping burgers somewhere. The thought was grimly satisfying. I was patient. Vengeance, I learned, is a dish best served not just cold, but on a silver platter you've forged yourself. While my company grew, I began to do what I do best. I gathered data. I hired a private investigator not to dig up dirt, but to give me a clear financial picture of the people who had cast me out. I wanted to understand their assets, their liabilities, their pressure points. I learned about my parents' over-leveraged real estate investments. And most interestingly, I learned about my brother, Mark. He had left his stable corporate job to start his own consulting firm, fueled by our parents' retirement money and a series of risky loans. He was chasing a single, massive government contract, a whale, that would either make him a tycoon or bankrupt him completely. And I watched and I waited as he swam right towards my hook. The trap wasn't something I had to build. My brother laid it for himself, and my parents and Sarah eagerly helped him set the bait. The whale Mark was hunting was a federal contract, codenamed Project Nightingale, a 9-figure deal to modernize the country's emergency medical supply chain. It was the kind of legacy-defining project that governments award once a decade. My private investigator's report was fascinating. Mark had named his new firm Apex Consulting, a name as arrogant and hollow as he was. He had charmed his way into the final bidding round against one other company. He had no idea that the other company, a quiet but powerful firm called Log-I-Core Solutions, was a wholly owned subsidiary of my corporation. I had created it specifically to bid on large government and military contracts discreetly. I got a copy of Apex Consulting's proposal. Reading it was a strange experience. It was like looking at a funhouse mirror reflection of my original dream. He had used all my old buzzwords: predictive modeling, dynamic routing, stress testing. He had stolen the vocabulary of my vision, the one I had passionately explained to my family at the dinner table years ago. But it was all surface, no substance. His technical specifications were vague, his projections wildly optimistic, and his platform was a poorly disguised third-party software with a fancy new interface. He was selling a promise he could never keep. My bid, in contrast, was surgical. It was backed by 3 years of real-world data, glowing testimonials from my existing clients, and the revolutionary, patented algorithm of Nexus. It was a battleship against his canoe. My parents, blinded by favoritism, had sunk every last cent of their retirement savings into Apex. They even took out a reverse mortgage on their house to help Mark hire a flashy marketing team. Sarah, ever the opportunist, was listed as his chief operating officer, her name right below his on the letterhead. They were all in, betting the entire family fortune on the charisma of the golden child. I could have just let Logicor win the contract and watched from afar as their world imploded. It would have been a quiet, clean victory. But that wasn't enough. The betrayal was personal, and the justice had to be personal too. I needed them to know who was behind their downfall. I needed to look them in the eyes when it happened. I just needed one final piece of evidence to make the destruction complete. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a number I hadn't seen in 5 years. It was Sarah. Her first text was tentative. Alex, it's Sarah. I know it's been a long time. I saw your company, Nexus, in a business journal. It said you were the founder. I couldn't believe it. I'm so incredibly proud of you. I stared at the message, a cold smile playing on my lips. The rumors had finally reached her. My name wasn't public, but my story was. The anonymous, brilliant founder who came from nothing. She must have hired her own investigator. The hunter was now being hunted. I didn't reply for a full day, letting her anxiety build. The follow-up messages grew more desperate. Please, Alex, just talk to me. I think about you all the time. Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. It was a pathetic, transparent performance. I finally responded with 7 simple words. You seem to be doing fine. This was the hook. I was dangling the image of her life with my brother, the life she chose, right in front of her. Her reply came almost instantly, a torrent of digital tears. Fine. It's a nightmare, Alex. Mark is a child playing businessman. Everything is riding on this one contract, and he's in way over his head. He's drowning in debt. Your parents are drowning with him. I let the silence hang for another hour before I typed my next line. His proposal seemed ambitious. I knew this would trigger her fear and her instinct for self-preservation, and it did. The text that came next was the one I had been waiting for, the one I knew would be my closing argument. Ambitious? Alex, it's a fraud. The whole thing is built on your old ideas for Nexus, the ones you told us about. He doesn't understand any of it. He's just selling smoke. Listen to me. If this deal falls through, we are completely ruined. But it doesn't have to be that way for you and me. Take me back. I'll walk away from him right now. I'll give you all of Apex's internal files, every email, every projection. I'll give you everything you need to make sure he's finished for good. We can be a team again, the way it should have been. I read the message once, twice. Then I took a screenshot, the white text glowing against the black background. It was more beautiful than any multi-million-dollar contract. It was a confession. It was a conspiracy. It was a signed warrant for the destruction of their entire world. A few days later, my mother called, her voice sweet as poison. Alex, darling, we're having a small dinner at Le Ciel to celebrate Mark and Sarah's engagement. We know things have been distant, but we'd love for you to be there, for us. The final piece had just fallen into place. I walked into the private dining room at Le Ciel right on time. The name of the restaurant meant the sky or heaven in French, which was fitting. They believed they had ascended to a new level of status, but they were about to be cast out. As I described, my entrance silenced them. The shock on their faces was deeply satisfying, a perfect appetizer. After a few tense seconds, my mother recovered, pasting on a brittle smile. Alex, you came. You look, well. The surprise in her voice was insulting. She gestured to the empty seat they'd begrudgingly set for me. Please, sit. We were just celebrating. I took my seat, nodding politely. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken questions. They were all studying me, trying to reconcile the broken man they had discarded with the calm, well-dressed person sitting before them. My father cleared his throat, eager to reestablish the family hierarchy. As your mother said, we're celebrating, he announced, puffing out his chest. Mark's final presentation for Project Nightingale was a massive success. The government committee was blown away. It's essentially a done deal. Finally, a real legacy for this family. He looked directly at me when he said it. A clear, final declaration of my status as the family failure. Mark leaned back in his chair, basking in the praise. He smirked at me, the picture of arrogance. That's right, bro. Big things are happening. Once the ink is dry and the first wire hits, Apex is going to be a household name. Don't you worry, I won't forget about you. Maybe I can float you a little loan to get you back on your feet. Sarah sat beside him, silent and pale. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just nervously twisted the massive diamond on her finger, the one he'd bought with our parents' retirement money. I just smiled and took a slow sip of water. I let them talk, let them toast their impending victory, let them heap praise on Mark and his fraudulent empire. I wanted them to climb as high as possible to make their fall that much more spectacular. Finally, after the main course was cleared, Mark stood up, raising his champagne flute. A toast, he declared grandly, to family, to success, and to Apex Consulting, the future of logistics. Everyone raised their glasses. I stood up as well, lifting my own water glass. I clinked it gently against my brother's. To the future, I said, my voice cutting through the celebratory murmur. And to the truth. Speaking of which, there's a short presentation I'd like to share with you all. Mark laughed, a condescending chuckle. A presentation? Alex, don't be ridiculous. This isn't one of your little nerd meetings. My father sighed dramatically. Son, put the phone away. Don't embarrass yourself. I ignored them. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a small, sleek Pico projector, and set it on the table. With a soft click, a bright rectangle of light appeared on the pristine white wall opposite them. Then, I connected my phone. Their smiles faded, replaced by confusion. And then the image resolved. It was a screenshot of a text message conversation, my name at the top. The words were large enough for everyone to read clearly. Ambitious? Alex, it's a fraud. The whole thing is built on your old ideas. If this deal falls through, we are completely ruined. Take me back. I'll walk away from him right now. I'll give you all of Apex's internal files. We can destroy him together. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Sarah made a sound like a strangled sob. Mark spun to face her, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. What is this? What did you do? He screamed. My mother looked from the screen to Sarah, her face a mask of pure disgust. You snake! My father was silent, his face ashen. Finally understanding the depth of the treachery at his table. They had started to turn on each other, just as I knew they would. But I wasn't finished. She was right about one thing, I said calmly, my voice cutting through the rising chaos. Your entire proposal, Mark, was a house of cards built on an idea you stole but never understood. The Project Nightingale Committee had serious technical questions that you couldn't answer. I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in. They didn't have those questions for the other bidder, Logicor Solutions, my company. The shock on their faces was exquisite. The committee made their final decision this afternoon. Project Nightingale has been awarded in full to Logicor. I signed the contract an hour before I came here. I looked at my parents. And due to evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation in your son's bid, I'm told the SEC will be launching a full investigation into Apex Consulting's funding. I'm truly sorry, but your retirement, your house, it's all gone. The scene devolved into pure chaos. Mark lunged at me, his face contorted in a mask of impotent rage. But the restaurant manager, likely alerted by the shouting, stepped between us. My brother, the golden child, was reduced to a sputtering, red-faced mess, screaming about how I had cheated, how I had ruined him. My mother, her face stained with tears, wasn't defending him. She was shrieking at Sarah, calling her every filthy name she could think of. And Sarah was just sitting there, curled into a ball on her chair, weeping hysterically, her dream of a wealthy, easy life dissolving before her eyes. My father, the pragmatist, the man who measured everything in dollars, was the quietest. He just stared at the wall where the text message had been, his expression utterly vacant. In his eyes, I could see him calculating the cascading losses, his savings, his house, his reputation. He looked like a man who had just witnessed his own death. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. My work was done. I calmly picked up my projector, placed it back in my briefcase, and straightened my tie. I gave them one last look, not with hatred or triumph, but with a profound and final indifference. They were no longer a part of my world. They were just ghosts, specters from a life I had long since shed. As I turned and walked towards the door of the private room, the maître d' held it open for me, his face a perfect mask of professional discretion. "Everything all right, sir?" he asked quietly. "Perfectly," I replied. "Thank you." I walked through the main dining room, past the other patrons enjoying their expensive meals, blissfully unaware of the lives imploding just a few feet away. The sounds of my family tearing each other apart faded behind me. When I stepped out into the cool night air, it felt like my first breath after being underwater for 5 years. I didn't feel a rush of adrenaline or a thrill of victory. I just felt quiet. I felt a profound sense of peace. The war was over. I hadn't just won. I had been liberated. I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply held up a mirror, and they had shattered themselves against their own reflection. Their greed, their arrogance, their betrayal, those were the weapons that brought them down. I was merely the messenger of a justice they had authored themselves. It's been 6 months since that night at Le Ciel. I read in the financial papers that Apex Consulting was dissolved in a firestorm of bankruptcy and litigation. My brother Mark is facing federal charges for investment fraud. I received a single, rambling letter from my mother, full of blame and self-pity, which I threw away without finishing. I heard through a distant relative that my parents had to sell their home and now live in a small apartment on the other side of town, their social circle having abandoned them as quickly as they abandoned me. As for Sarah, she disappeared. Her number is disconnected, her social media deleted. She vanished like a puff of smoke, a ghost consumed by her own desperate choices. I have not seen or spoken to any of them. I feel no need to. My revenge was never truly about them. It was about me. For so many years, I had defined my self-worth by their standards. I was the scapegoat son, the failed husband, the disappointment. Their judgment was the air I breathed, and it was toxic. When they cast me out, they thought they were burying me, but they didn't realize they had planted a seed in fertile ground, watered by injustice. The solitude they forced upon me became my sanctuary. It allowed me to finally hear my own voice, to trust my own vision, free from their constant chorus of doubt and scorn. The greatest success wasn't signing the Project Nightingale contract or watching their world crumble. It was the quiet realization that I no longer needed their approval for anything. My validation comes from the work I do, the team I've built, and the future I am creating. Last month, I launched the Nexus Foundation, a nonprofit wing of my company dedicated to providing seed funding and mentorship to young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds, people with big dreams who have been told they're not good enough. Looking out over the city from my office, I don't feel the ghosts of the past. I don't feel anger or bitterness. I feel only a profound sense of gratitude, not for what they did, but for the strength I discovered in myself when I had no one else to rely on. They took everything from me, and in doing so, they gave me the one thing I truly needed: myself.